Hello and welcome to the Grand Campaign recap of Session 1. This video will be an overview of the important wars that occurred during the first session and other developments split up geographically. If you wish to watch the full stream of the Grand Campaign, a link to the playlist can be found in the description below. Europe, 26 players. Europe overall saw the highest amount of players, wars and events. The first war to break out was the Swedish War of Independence. Here they were backed by Lithuania, while Denmark had called up their ally Lubeck. The war started off in favour of the Danes with some early gains, which meant that initially it looked good for Denmark, and it could be a decisive win early. However, the combined Lithuanian-Swedish troops did regain the ground later during the war, and eventually able to push Denmark out of Sweden and invade some of Norway. From this moment onward, Denmark focused on removing Lithuania from the war, while on the front in Sweden reached a stalemate. Eventually, Denmark would have been able to force the Lithuanians out of the war and achieve victory. However, the speed of the war was greatly reduced when Muscovy invaded Sweden to secure Finland. Sweden was in no position to defend and was easily destroyed by the Muscovite forces. This led to Muscovite involvement in Lithuania as well, when they were able to easily force the now bankrupt Lithuania out of the war with minimum casualties. Overall, Muscovite involvement greatly decreased the length of the war. Following the Muscovite annexation of Finland, Denmark took land from Sweden and reinstated the Union. This war had a total of just over 100,000 casualties for the combined Swedish-Lithuanian side and 87,000 casualties for the combined Danish-Lubeck alliance. Denmark is now severely in debt, and Lubeck has declared bankruptcy twice already, but Denmark did manage to hold on to the Kalmar Union. While this was happening, Castile, backed by their Portuguese friends, launched an invasion of Aragon. The war saw initial success for Castile, as they themselves fielded a much larger army than Aragon, and while Portugal arrived quite quickly on the front lines, the Aragonese ally of Tunis was initially slightly distracted with the war against AI. Aragon's informal ally Morocco did eventually come to raid too, although by that point it was arguably too little too late. While Castile was making pushes into Aragon's flatland forts, Aragon did manage to secure naval superiority, which allowed Tunis to reinforce their allies and prepare for a final stand on their mountain fort. However, Castile's numerical advantage, combined with their starting 15% morale and the help of Portugal, was enough to overpower the Aragonese even on the mountains. The war continued even after this defeat, although after this Aragon had very little of securing anything resembling a victory. Hence, by 1452, Aragon accepted the Castilian peace, leading to severe loss of land for them. During the war, the combined Castilian-Portuguese alliance lost 64,000 men, while Aragon, Tunis, Morocco lost over 80,000. This war also saw Castile secure their hold on Iberia, bringing to question how long an independent Portugal may last without foreign intervention if Castile decided to go for them next. Regardless, despite Tunis and Moroccan losses during the war, they still remained as reasonable powers that could between themselves put up a good fight against Castilian expansion into Africa, if Castile pursues that direction. The two above were also not the only wars in Europe. Under threat from the French that if they did not give up their land in mainland Europe, the French would support Scotland, England returns their course to France. For this, France revoked their guarantee of Scotland, and England went right into that war. However, the English clearly underestimated the power of the Scottish could yield, and Scotland went into full death war, loading up and going above force limit. This led to multiple victories for Scotland on their hill fort border England, and after a while England was forced to take that war seriously, murking up themselves. But by that point, Scotland itself was starting to make gains, and the threat of the War of the Roses approaching, England went generously over the force limit and prepared to deal a final blow to the Scottish. The expedition was extremely costly for the English, putting them severely into debt, and in their weakened state Burgundy declared war on them, seizing Calais. However, England was able to eventually overpower the Scottish, but unable to achieve a total victory and severely in debt, they settled the peace with only one province. The war cost the Scottish 53,000 men, however England spent way too much money on it, permanently weakening the economy and also leading to the loss of over 62,000. This war was devastating for both countries, leaving Scotland bankrupt, but at least with a truce to protect them until the end of it, while England was severely in debt, now fully removed from the European continent, and no longer a great power, with just one Scottish province to show for it. This may be all for the super early European wars, but by far the biggest war was yet to come. Rising Ottoman power from the game start had not gone unnoticed by their neighbours, who were scared of an Ottoman hegemony. Meanwhile, the Ottomans themselves were aware of their awkward position, and secured alliances with Poland and Austria with the promise of partitioning Hungary. Hence in 1452 the Ottomans, who had already consolidated much of Anatolia and made moves into the Balkans, declared war on Hungary, bringing Poland, Austria, with the promise of Hungarian land. Meanwhile, Hungary called for the help from their Venetian allies, who had interest in securing Balkan land from the Ottomans, while at the same time calling their other allies the Mamluks, who had ambitions to curb the Ottoman power overall. This war was strongly contested. The Ottomans were forced to focus on the Mamluk front, where despite their early success, the Mamluks eventually were beaten back, however at a great cost to both sides. Hungary, Venice, Poland and Austria basically fought their own war while the Ottomans fought the Mamluks. In the European theatre, Hungary pushed to peace out Austria, and they were almost successful twice, being beaten back at great losses both times. They then tried to go for Poland, where again they were almost successful, but eventually the Polish were able to secure a battle and push them out. Meanwhile, slowly but surely, after many a battle, the Mamluks were eventually beaten by the Ottomans, so by that point Hungary was out of any capacities for launching another offensive. The war came to an end with a Hungarian unconditional surrender. This peace deal saw Poland and Austria expand into Hungary, while the Ottomans seized Kosovo, depriving Hungary of that goldmine. Overall, this was by far the bloodiest war, with 479,000 battle casualties on the Ottoman side and 444,000 on the Hungarian side. Once attrition was factored in, the total losses for the war were just over 1.2 million men. This war took 7 years and established Ottomans as the hegemon of the Balkan region, solidifying Polish and Austrian power while greatly diminishing the importance of the Mamluks, and leading to the de facto destruction of Hungary. Now moving on to Asia, with 12 players. Asia was the second most popular destination for the players this grand campaign. Regardless, many players here were more isolated, like the Khmer and Oda players. They didn't mean they didn't see war, as there were many an AI to eat. However, only one real player war emerged out of this area, the war for the control of India. India was initially populated with 6 players, leading to quite the setup for an Indian Thunderdome, which started in 1448. This war would see Jaunpur, Vijayanagar and Orissa ally themselves against Sirhind, Belgaum and Sindh. The war saw initial success for the invading Jaunpuri forces, but they decided to secure land from Sirhind, which still at the time of the outbreak of the war had its troops fighting against AI. However, Sirhind, with its amazing 4-fire 5-shock general, was very quickly able to mount a counter-offensive and push Jaunpur out of land. However, eventually the combined Jaunpur, Vijay and Orissan forces were able to overwhelm the Bengal defences, and Sirhind was unable to decisively push into Jaunpur during that period, and as such eventually they were beaten back by sheer numbers as Bengal was forced to peace out. This war led to the domination of India by the Jaunpur, Vijay Orissan coalition, with any opportunities for resisting them crushed early. Overall, 187,000 Indians died in that war, with 112,000 of those being on the Jaunpur side, and 74,000 of those being on the Sirhind side. Moving on to Africa with 5 players. Africa was a relatively peaceful continent, save many an AI war. Ethiopia and Mutapa both expanded their spheres of influence greatly, and despite some early talks of war between them, it culminated in nothing. Meanwhile, the Mamluks, Tunis and Morocco were all involved in notable war with Europeans, and actually stayed on neutral terms at worst with each other. Hence, as an overview of the situation currently, many people burnt hard in the first session, but some did much better than others. In Europe, French inaction in all major conflicts led in a powerful state, and it continues to consolidate mainland France with expansion into Burgundy. France stands as a strong contender for dominating European politics. Meanwhile, Muscovy emerges as a real winner of the prolonged war between Denmark and Sweden, establishing itself firmly within Finland, while with a consolidation of a strong power base in its home region. Down south from Muscovy, the Ottomans emerge victorious out of a series of costly wars with AI and players alike. They stand with a hegemony over Turkey and the Balkans guaranteed, with a weakened Mamluk standing in their way for any further Middle Eastern expansion. However, for this position, the Ottomans did suffer the most casualties, with over 250,000 dead overall, a number second only to the Mamluks, with just under 300,000. Going further south from the Mamluks, Scythia and Ethiopia growing greatly in strength, and the same could be said for Mutapa, who up until very recently were basically playing single player, quickly consolidating their region. Going east from Ethiopia, we see Oman establishing itself as the primary power in Arabia. India, as discussed before, is now dominated by 3 players. However, going further east, we see Khmer beginning to consolidate control of Vietnam, while Majapahti starts to expand in Indonesia. Going north, we see Korea also expanding quickly, while growing their power base, and finally Oda, which started a harsh initial setback from an unfortunately timed coalition war, begin to consolidate their control of Japan. This concludes the Grand Campaign recap for Session 1. If you wish to watch the streams for the next session live, you can do so by tuning up at 7pm GMT to 11pm GMT on Sunday every week, until further notice. If you wish to join the Grand Campaign, the server it is hosted on is known for having a lot of players new to MP, so you would fit right in, or at the same time be able to learn quickly, as there are many very experienced MP players who are also regulars on the server.